It is 480 BC, and the most powerful man on Earth is directing his fury at an impossible target, the ocean. King Xerxes of Persia has just ordered his men to strike the Hellespont Strait with 300 lashes. He commands them to plunge red-hot irons into the surf to brand it, and to hurl heavy iron shackles into the depths. 500 years later, Roman Emperor Caligula stands on the shores of the English Channel. He orders Rome's battle-hardened legionnaires to draw their weapons, charge into the surf, and physically stab the waves. When the battle concludes, he commands the soldiers to gather seashells and fill their helmets. He declares these shells the literal spoils of war, claimed directly from Neptune, the god of the sea. For over 2 millennia, history has pointed to these events as proof of madness. These were, supposedly, megalomaniacs so detached from reality they believed they could physically fight water. Absolute monarchs do not survive by throwing toddler tantrums. By investigating the specific authors of these accounts, the image of madness evaporates into a display of ruthless political calculation. The Persian invasion of Greece posed a massive logistical nightmare. Xerxes had to move hundreds of thousands of soldiers from dozens of different nations across the Hellespont, a mile-wide strait separating Asia from Europe. His engineers built a massive floating pontoon bridge to cross it, but a violent storm shredded the cables and shattered the structure. For an army stranded far from home, facing delays and logistical failure, morale was entirely reliant on the king's aura of invincibility. In Persian culture, imperial power was demonstrated through the concept of yoking, bringing the chaotic parts of the world under strict order. Dropping iron shackles into the sea was a calculated religious ritual to establish submission, not an expectation of literally arresting the water. The whipping was public political theater. Xerxes needed his terrified, multi-ethnic army to see that their king was the undisputed master of nature. It was a projection of control at a moment when control was slipping. We only know this story because it was recorded by the victorious Greeks, specifically the historian Herodotus. He had a clear agenda, framing the Persian ritual as an act of terrible hubris to make the enemy look dangerously unhinged. Herodotus drew a direct line between binding the sea and subjugating humans, using the imagery of yoking the Hellespont to prove Xerxes was a despot. For decades, Greeks repeated this bitter water detail as propaganda, defining the king as defying the gods. The whipping of the Hellespont served a highly rational, internal military purpose for Persia. The Greeks rebranded it, turning a display of imperial dominance into a lasting myth of madness. 5 centuries later, Emperor Caligula is stationed on the shores of Gaul. His military campaign stalled while facing the British Isles. Modern historical analysis points to a crisis behind the delay. Caligula's elite legions had mutinied, flatly refusing his orders to board the ships and cross the English Channel. The order to battle the water served as a brutal, calculated military humiliation. By forcing elite infantry into menial labor on the beach, Caligula systematically stripped the mutineers of their honor. A linguistic twist alters the record. The Latin military slang, conche, translated literally to seashells, but soldiers used it to mean small enemy boats. Decades later, hostile biographers read that Caligula ordered men to collect conche and interpreted it as literal seashells. Writers like Suetonius relied heavily on gossip and biased Senate records. They needed Caligula to look like a delusional tyrant to justify his eventual assassination. Caligula's famous bout of insanity was a devastatingly effective punishment for treason, buried permanently by a simple linguistic misunderstanding. The distortion of reality continues in the medieval era. Take King Canute the Great, who supposedly carried his throne to the beach and commanded the tide to halt. Historical texts from the era explicitly state Canute's intent. He used the rising water to demonstrate to his flattering courtiers that secular power is empty. He wanted to show that only God controlled the natural world. Modern society has completely inverted the narrative. The story is almost exclusively misquoted to depict Canute as an arrogant fool who actually believed he was omnipotent. We still see this completely false narrative repeated today. The Canute moment is routinely referenced in modern journalism to criticize politicians or disaster responses that fail to stop unstoppable forces. Society actively prefers the entertaining myth of an arrogant, foolish king over the boring truth of a pious one. That preference is exactly what guarantees the false version of the story survives. Across Persia, Rome, and England, the ocean functioned as the ultimate proxy. The sea is an unconquerable, chaotic blank canvas. A ruler standing on the shore is using that massive scale to communicate a highly specific message directly to their subjects. Whether the goal was projecting absolute dominance, inflicting military humiliation, or demonstrating religious piety, the intended audience was never the water. The audience was the humans watching from the beach. Whenever a major historical event seems completely senseless or unhinged, you are likely not looking at madness. You are looking at a highly rational act filtered through enemy propaganda, lost in a bad translation, or deliberately stripped of its context. History belongs to the survivors who write the records.